The 1960 movie Inherit the Wind is a dramatization of the famous Scopes monkey trial, where a teacher was tried and convicted for teaching evolution in a public school. In the movie, prosecutor Matthew Brady is portrayed as an aging demagogue and a religious zealot who denounces evolution and is ultimately humiliated in court. That character was based on William Jennings Bryan. The trouble with the movie image is that it hardly does justice to a man who was once the country's most progressive politician. Bryan was a deeply religious man who steered the Democratic Party away from its conservative roots. He also challenged the financial establishment. Writing for the Post, he said, "The arrogance of our financiers are creating a gulf between the very poor and the very rich. It is time to displace the corporate influences that now have such a powerful hold upon politics." In 1896, he was a young Nebraska congressman who addressed the Democratic National Convention on behalf of farmers and workers. He gave an electrifying speech in favor of free silver, a radical policy that would authorize the U.S. to use both gold and silver as its monetary standard. Opponents said it would destabilize the currency and lead to inflation, but farmers believed it would raise the prices for their crops while lowering their debts. For Bryan, free silver was a way to correct the imbalance of power between rich and poor voters. He concluded his convention speech with words that would become legendary.
"We will answer the demand for a gold stamp by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold."
The convention roared its agreement. The applause continued for an hour. The next day, Bryan became the youngest presidential candidate of a major party in U.S. history at the age of 36. But he was too radical for many Democrats. The party had long taken the cautious and safe route. The first Democrat elected since the Civil War had been the conservative Grover Cleveland. When the election came, these voters lent their support to the Republicans, and Bryan lost. But most Democrats thought he was the voice of the future. They nominated him for president again in 1900, but he again lost. Between campaigns, Bryan continued to be the party's voice for reform. He believed government should protect individuals and the democratic process from monopolies. He shifted the party's philosophy from minimal government to proactively helping small farmers and industrial laborers. When he was again nominated for the presidency, the political landscape had changed. Bryan's campaign to break up monopolies and check corporate influence in Washington had now become a popular idea. The government had already started taking action against monopolies, but Bryan was now looking towards further reforms. He campaigned for a federal income tax, an end to corporate financing of campaigns, and federal regulation of banks and securities. He also pushed for pure food and drug laws, limits on child labor, women's suffrage, and the rights of labor unions to strike. Bryan ran against William Taft, the successor of the wildly popular President Roosevelt, and for a third time he lost. In 1912, he campaigned for the successful Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson. Once elected, Wilson acted on several causes Bryan had pushed for decades: antitrust laws, a progressive income tax, protection of unions, and the regulation of banks and child labor. Bryan became Secretary of State, but resigned when he sensed Wilson was drifting toward involvement in the World War. After leaving office, Bryan continued advocating for an 8-hour day, a minimum wage, the right of unions to strike, and, increasingly, women's suffrage. Leaving politics, he promoted Florida real estate and spent the final years of his life trying to have evolution removed from school curricula. In 1925, he joined the team prosecuting John Scopes for teaching evolution. The defense team was led by famed attorney Clarence Darrow. After the judge threw out the testimony of Darrow's witnesses, Darrow called Bryan as a witness. They had agreed to submit to each other's questioning. For 2 hours, out on the courthouse lawn, Darrow questioned Bryan on biblical inconsistencies before the judge ruled the questioning irrelevant and removed it from the record. The trial was soon over, and Scopes was found guilty. Bryan's objection to evolution came partly from his strict interpretation of the Bible, but it also came from his belief that survival of the fittest was a dangerous idea, which the powerful would use to justify their preying on the weak. After Wilson, Warren G. Harding was elected, and the Republicans held the White House for 12 years. The New Deal of the next Democratic president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, was considered by some to be Bryan's platform with a new name. And Roosevelt's successor, Harry Truman, said, "If it wasn't for old Bill Bryan, there wouldn't be any liberalism at all in the country now." Bryan kept liberalism alive. He kept it going. This video is brought to you by the Saturday Evening Post Digital Archives. Saturday Evening Post members can explore our 200-year-old archive and receive 6 issues of the Post print edition for only $15 a year. Subscribe today at the link below.